Welcome to another episode of Real Sciences podcast. This is Omar Mariwani, and I'm meeting with Kenny Biddle from Skeptical Inquirer. Kenny is a science enthusiast who investigates claims of paranormal experiences, equipment, photos, and video. He's the chief investigator in Skeptical Inquirer, as well as an author in Skeptical Inquirer. Kenny, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And this is going to be introduced into the Arabic audience. It's going to be published in the magazine in the next month, and we're going to publish it as well in the English podcast. Thank you so much. And as we used to do, can I ask you to give us and to our audience some introduction about your journey and how did you end up with investigating paranormal claims in that way?
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be on. Um, so my journey, wow, it's been a long journey, a lot of years. I started out as a ghost hunter. I don't know if you want me to go into that
Yeah.
story, my transition. Okay. So it's a long story. So get yourself a drink, buckle in. Here we go. So growing up, I grew up in a Catholic household. So I had this like kind of spiritual beliefs going on, and it opened me up to the afterlife, the possibility of an afterlife. And I was always interested in ghosts and monsters. I grew up watching shows in the US called like In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries. There was another show called Sightings. Really interesting stuff to me growing up. I didn't have any fact checking ability back then. So when I watched these TV series, I just took it at face value. I was like, "Yep, whatever. You said there's a monster in the lake. Okay, I'm on board." Um, so as I grew up and I got married, back in '97, and as a wedding gift to ourselves, we bought ourselves our first home computer. And I mean, the internet was brand new back then. So the first thing I did was get on and I looked up ghosts. I wanted to see what was in the area, what was going on. And I found a group that got together in my area and they went to haunted houses and they investigated this stuff. And I was like, my mind was blown. Like, wow, we can really do this. I can just join a group. So that's what I did. I joined a group. I went out with them to a couple places like cemeteries, local haunted houses, historic locations. And the more I learned, the more I was like, well, like some of this stuff is really cool. And I thought like these anomalies in photographs, these like balls of light and these misty forms and shadows and stuff were all ghosts. That's what I was brought up on. So one day we're out in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which for the U.S. history people, that was part of the Civil War, and it was a big deal. There was 51,000 or so casualties for that. So it's a hot spot for any ghost hunters. Any ghost hunting groups in the area love going there, and it's just that's what attracts them. I go for the history, but the majority of people go for the ghost stories now. So I'm out there. I'm out there with my group, and we're attending one of the early ghost conferences, and this is early 2000s. And we go out to this place on the battlefield, and we had heard from the local rangers that this was a place where all the park rangers they wouldn't go. They wouldn't go because they were afraid of it. There was too much activity, and they saw ghosts and shadows and all this kind of stuff. So we had learned about it. That's where we're going. So myself and a small group of people were in the woods, and we're waiting patiently. It's dark. It's quiet. We're waiting for something to happen. And I look out past the wood line, past the tree line into an open field, and there's a road. And I see three cars start driving down the road. I see their headlights. I'm like, all right, no big deal. Then they pull over, and the people get out and they start walking through the open field. And this is not too far from us. I see flashlights going all over. They're playing like lightsaber battles with the flashlights. They have these temperature guns. They're infrared temperature guns that have laser pointers on them, and they're playing with those because that's what we do with laser pointers. We play with them, and they're making a lot of noise. And I was starting to get angry about this because they're disturbing what we're doing. We're serious, and I'm using air quotes, serious ghost hunters here. Then they start getting closer, They're walking in my direction. And I'm like, oh no, they're gonna find us. They're gonna ask what we're doing. They're gonna want to join us. I don't want that. Like, this is our territory. We don't want it to share. So the closer they got, the madder I got. So I finally just lost my temper. I walked out of the woods and I started screaming at them to shut up, turn around, go away, get out of here. This is our spot. Leave us alone. And to my surprise, like, they all stopped dead, turned around, ran back to the cars, got back in the cars, drove away. That was it. Didn't see him the rest of the night. The next morning, we get up, my friends and I, we get up, we go down to the conference that we were attending, and we're in the lobby and we're talking to a bunch of people. And we start hearing about this group of people that saw an apparition last night. Like, they really saw one. And I'm like, oh, great. You know, we go over there, start talking, asking questions, and we realized that they were in a place called the wheat field. And I was like, that's great. That's where we were. We were right next to that field. And we asked what time, and they're like, oh, about like 8 o'clock or so. And I'm like, that's great. We were there at that time. And I'm like, where were you exactly? And they're like, oh, we were the wheat field, and there's a tree line that goes into this patch of woods. And I'm like, where, wait a minute. We were right there. Why didn't we see this? And then the light bulb over my head went on, and I was like, oh, I think you saw me. I think you saw me. And they're like, no, this was an apparition. It was a big apparition, came out of the woods. I was like, yeah, it came out and started yelling at you. And they're like, well, yeah, it was yelling, but we couldn't understand what it was saying. But it wasn't you. And I was like, that was me. And I described, like, their flashlights, their laser pointers, how many people there were, how many cars. I described all of this information to them, and they were still like, no, it wasn't you. And then they were getting mad. And one of them actually told me, stop stealing our spotlight, because everyone was paying attention to them, because they're the only ones that came back the night before with an apparition story. So they were mad that I was trying to steal their thunder or their popularity. I was like, no. Then it really hit me. Like, we're all ghost hunters here. We're all the same. And yet I'm telling you exactly what happened. Even though I wasn't allegedly there, I'm telling you with all the details, and you're not accepting this information. You're ignoring it and still going with your belief. So that really hit me hard. And for the next couple of weeks after that, I really reevaluated what I was doing and took a look at myself and realized, like, yeah, I did ignore a lot of things along the way because I wanted to hold on to my belief. I wanted to hold on to that cool story that I might have had a ghost sighting or heard a ghost or something like that. And the more I realized that, the more I wanted to learn about science and a scientific approach to this. So I got into the skeptical literature, and I found Skeptical Inquirer magazine, which is a great circle. It really comes around full circle because I found that. I found the work of Ben Radford and Joe Nickell, and they were doing excellent work. They weren't just investigating. Like, my term for investigating was going out and sitting in the dark and waiting for something to happen. They were actually investigating claims and then coming to a conclusion based on all of the information they had. And I thought that was great. So I learned more about them. And eventually I transitioned over to the skeptical side because I was also into photography. I love photography, really got into it. And I learned more about that and how light interacts with film and glass plate and sensors, and figured out how all of these anomalies that we get, that some people consider ghosts, I found out how they were created, how you can do that, how you can get them by mistake and or on purpose. So the more I did that, the more I realized, all right, I'm not a ghost hunter anymore. I can't be, because I'm not getting ghosts. And then I started reaching out to different people. I reached out to Ben Radford, and he suggested that I write for the Skeptical Inquirer newsletter, which was Skeptical Briefs for a time. And I did that. I wrote like two or three articles for them. And then I started writing for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, the online version. And then Barry Carr, my boss now, he's like, you want to write a column? And I said, yes. Started doing that. And they also wanted to know if I wanted to do videos because I had a YouTube channel. So I started producing videos for them. And then Joe Nickell, who is an awesome investigator. I mean, he's been doing it. He's been investigating paranormal claims as long as I've been alive. So he knows a lot of knowledge, and he has stepped down from here. And there was a position here, and they wanted to keep it. So I applied, and they said, "Yeah, we love your work. We love what you do." And here I am. I'm in the office. I'm actually in the office that belonged to Paul Kurtz, which was one of our co-founders for when it was called PsyCop.
That's a great story, and I think it would be more interesting if you have any website where you share your best photos, so we can include them within the podcast. I'm interested to see them, either related to the topic or just the artistic ones.
Well, I don't do a lot of. I mean, the photography that I did was usually product photography, family photos, portraits. But then when I got into other things like landscape and then specialty photography, I don't really publish my work. I did some. I had a lot of landscape photos that I used to put out, and I just stopped doing it because I got more interested in figuring out how other people's photos were done. So most of my photography now is basically recreations of ghosts or monsters or UFOs, and trying to figure out how they did it. And I post that. So that's all on skepticalinquirer.org. You can find stuff like that.
Okay. So with that group, it was very interesting that you had solid evidence. The evidence was you were the ghost, and then you told them that you were the ghost. But it's often difficult to answer someone who claims that they have seen some paranormal experience. They just have seen a ghost or heard something. So, what's your strategy usually to talk with someone who claims that they have seen such thing?
So the first step for me is to listen to them. I don't dismiss them out of hand, and I think that's a terrible thing to do if people just dismiss you, because as far as I'm concerned, they experienced something, but what that something is, we don't know yet. They interpret it as a ghost or a shadow or whatever, a monster, or whatever situation we're in. But do we really know that? I don't know, because I wasn't there with them. So I want to listen to their story. I want to hear what they have to say. And then I also want to ask about the experience and get clarifying details. So if they tell me something like, I saw a ghost in period dress, that's a common description that we get here. So my follow-up questions right away is, well, what kind of period dress? What does that mean? Like, you have to explain it to me. And I try not to give them any kind of descriptors. I don't want to put my terminology in their mouth. I want them to describe things in their own words and then clarify it as we go. So even after that, when we want to look for possible explanations that don't have to do with ghosts, I try to have a discussion with them rather than me telling them, oh, it's probably this, probably that, probably, it's this other thing. I want to have a discussion and maybe give hints of what I think it might be, and then really get them to come to a conclusion. Because one of the exercises that I do is say, all right, well, we talked about your experience. You think it's a ghost. How about, just for fun, we set aside that explanation of ghost. We set that aside for right now, and we try to brainstorm ideas to see what we could come up with that might explain this too, without invoking the paranormal. And once we go through that exercise, they usually come up with a lot of explanations on their own, and I don't have to do it, which is great, because when they do it themselves, it makes more of an impact on their thinking. So, I mean, that's my goal. That's my goal, is to improve the quality of their thinking. So that helps. And I mean, really, it comes down to listening. It really comes down to listening, because too many times I've seen someone have a weird experience or strange experience. They can't understand it. They don't know where to turn. And then they reach out to someone in maybe the skeptical community, and they say, hey, I've had this experience. And instead of having a conversation about it, the person they reached out to says, well, you're probably just hallucinating, or you're just this, and sometimes I've heard people call them stupid. And I can't stand that. I really can't stand that, because it's not building a relationship. It's not helping anyone. It just makes them hate us more, and vice versa. It doesn't go anywhere. So my best advice is to be nice, talk about it, and see if you can come to a mutual conclusion based on really thinking it out. Good evidence, good data, and go from there. I mean, if you can't come to a conclusion, then say I don't know. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. Because if you don't know, then hell, dude, you don't know. It's as simple as that. Instead of making things up, and I see that on both sides. Some people will try to make up an explanation just to explain it. Other people will make up an explanation just to justify, their belief in a ghost or a demon or something like that. Stop making things up. Just go with what you know, and when you run out of things, you say, "I don't know. Let's look it up," because we all have Google, and we can look things up more. We can learn more. So that's my advice from the start.
So, Kenny, I think we have a version of ghosts in the Middle East and the Islamic world from an early times. I read some historical accounts of the Arabs being afraid of going to some specific region in the desert where there are empty houses, and they believed that there are that was even pre-Islamic. They believed that there are jinns who live there, which is the Arabic version of the ghosts, which later became the Islamic version of the same idea. But in general, I can't claim that this is the most common superstition that we have. So we can notice that there are differences, some geographical differences in the superstitious beliefs. I remember having a conversation with an American woman in 2012, and she was in Baghdad, and she was looking at the full moon, and she mentioned how people believe that there are bad things that could happen when there is a full moon. And I said, it's not going to happen here, and because nobody believes in this here. It's something that's specific to the Western culture or American culture. I can't specify, but I can say the most common superstitious beliefs in the Middle East and North Africa are related to medicine. So it's either as a pseudoscience or as a complete superstition. They are just competing with the medical field, and they are selling these products. And there are healers, there are medications, there are products, and it's a whole industry. So that
Yeah.
could be a reason why there is a difference in the distribution of these beliefs. I can also mention I mentioned our version of the ghosts, and there is wide range of beliefs about the evil eye as well. So if I make a list, and this is not a statistical note from me, I can say things that are related to medicine, things that are related to religion, like believing that the religion agrees with the science, and things that are related to evil eye. Can you make a similar list of what you think the most common superstitious beliefs in the West, or at least in the United States?
So there's a bunch, and I mean there's so many cultures in the United States that, I mean, you can go to different parts of the country and have different beliefs or different superstitions. But some of the most common ones that we have, you mentioned like the full moon. So we have that where people believe like more injuries will happen on the full moon, that people become like crazy or crazier, depending on their outlook, during a full moon, and just weird things will happen. There's a popular belief that things happen in threes. So something bad happens, people are expecting at least two more things to happen, but they don't really count. They'll count to three and then stop it, and then if you get four, then that starts another one. So there's always that justification, like, oh well, we did have a group of three, but we're going to go with a different group of three now. You mentioned medicine and stuff. We do have a big problem with homeopathy here. So homeopathic medicines, which are not medicines, it's alt medicine, which means it's not medicine. But people love using this and promoting it as something that cures anything from your common cold to cancer. And basically, it's all the same. It's just water dripped on a sugar pill, and they sell it for and extremely a lot of money. I mean, it usually costs more than the actual medicine, but there's also claims that it cures everything and it's all natural. So people believe in that and they buy it. And sadly, I see too many people buy it and rely on that, and their condition usually gets worse. We also have things like 13th floor. Uh, there's a lot of buildings in some of the cities that will not have a 13th floor. I mean, they have a 13th floor, but when you get in the elevator, it goes from 12 to 14. So you get out on the 13th floor, but you're technically on the 14th, according to the elevator button. So we have that a lot. And I've been into a lot of hospitals that have had that, which just, it blows my mind. We have stuff like that. You also have the bad luck about, like, you can't walk under a ladder. That's a big superstition. Don't walk under a ladder. You can't have a black cat cross your path because that's bad luck. People counter the bad luck with knocking on wood. I'm not sure where that came from, but basically it's like, if something bad happens or you say something like, oh, I hope I don't get in a car crash, they knock on wood. It's like, that's not going to do anything. But okay. So these are some of the superstitions we have. I mean, my personal one. So I mean, I'm not immune to superstitions. I have a superstition when it comes to technology. And whenever I go to the store, if I go to a store and I'm buying something new, like any kind of technology, and that's all it is, just technology, nothing else, I can't take the first box. So the first box on the shelf, in my head, all I can picture is someone else has already picked that up. They've already shaken it. They've opened it, maybe looked inside and maybe messed with it. So I don't do that. I usually reach back and I grab the last one, and that's the one I buy. So that's my own superstition. It has no basis in reality or any science. It's just my own silliness in my head. But yeah, that's some of the ones that I've heard about, that I've come across. If you want to talk religion, I mean, I still see a lot of people wear, like, I wear Thor's hammer, but it's more this. This has no religious symbolism for me. This actually has symbolism for my wife, because my wife bought it for me to, quote, because I crushed the hopes and dreams of ghost hunters everywhere. That's why she got me Thor's hammer. Because I would go to tours and I would explain all the photographs, I would explain the videos, I would explain situations, and just take all the quote unquote fun out of the ghost story. So that's why she got me this. But I still see people wear like crucifixes, crosses, and if they're in a weird situation or a scary situation, they will hold it and they say a prayer. And a common phrase is like, the power of Christ compels you. You know, they'll say something like that, invoke something like that in order to, because they believe it'll stop the evil or stop the scariness around them and makes them feel better. So those are some of the superstitions that I've come across over the years. And I mean, there's tons more. We could talk for hours on just superstitions.
By the way, you mentioned 13, number 13, and I think they're saying there's something similar with the Friday 13th, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we have Friday the 13th here. It's a popular movie.
So, yeah, there is a similar, I don't know if I call it a superstition, but it's a hoax or a misinformation. And in the Middle East, they say that the Westerners just hate Friday 13th when the moon is full, because it's the day when Saladin in the Battle of Hattin had made the victory against the Crusaders. And
Okay.
if you write the name of the battle in Google, you will find that it happened on the 4th of July. So it wasn't 13, and I haven't checked if it's a Friday or not.
That's good. I mean, I grew up. So we have a series of films called Friday the 13th, and I grew up with them because they came out. I think the first one came out in like 76 or 77. And that's all I know about Friday the 13th. Like, that's growing up, it's always been about this character called Jason Voorhees, and he goes around and just murders everyone that goes to a camp. And that's how I see Friday the 13th. And then you also have a lot of Americans that see it as a bad luck day. You know, they want to do extra or take extra care to not step on cracks, not mirror all these other superstitions that happen. But for me, I mean, we have CFI had a Friday the 13th party on Friday the 13th one year, and we had signs up. There's actually a sign outside my window here that says, "Please step on the cracks," because apparently stepping on crack is like a superstition. It brings you bad luck or something. But we have signs all over, you know, like do that. Here's a ladder. We set ladders up so you can walk underneath them all day long. So I mean, we have fun with it. Never had anything bad happen just because of it.
Kenny, have you came across the story of the Carpathian Castle or Le Chateau de Carpath, which is a novel by Jules Verne?
I have not.
So this was a good experience for me in the childhood. It's about a haunted castle in the mountains of the Carpath in Eastern Europe, and the story starts about how the people are afraid of what's happening there and all the supernatural stuff that are happening in the castle. But later, few people decide to go there and discover it, and they discovered that everything was made up and they were tricks, and there was someone who was intentionally making this. I don't want to ruin the story if someone wants to read it, although it's from the 19th century. But
Okay.
I think what is relevant to this is I ask you how to answer someone, but now if we can move deeper, and what are the most common scientific explanations that you have the ghost phenomena? We know that there are hallucinations, for example. We know that there are some chemical effects that can induce hallucinations. So what is your list of the most common scientific explanations that?
Okay. So I find the number one cause is misperception. Just people don't understand what they're looking at or what they're experiencing, and they jump right to a belief. Because most of these people that I deal with, that I engage with, they are ghost hunters, which are basically they're hobbyists. This is their hobby. It's not a professional career. It's not their serious business, unless even if they're on TV. But it's a hobby. So when they're going out, they already have this idea in their head that a location is haunted, and that's going in with a bias. Honestly, it's going in with a bias. They're already predisposed to believe that this place is haunted. They've heard stories, they've heard other groups go in there, and they want to get the same experience. So when they go in, they are primed. They're primed for a ghostly experience. And a lot of these locations now have papers in each room that lists all the ghosts that are supposed to be in there, what they do, what their names are, how to go about contacting them. So you get all this priming, and the people are just ready to believe. There's no science whatsoever. So I think the biggest problem is perception. They go in there with a false idea of what's going on, and when they look at a photograph that has a like a glowing ball of light or this misty form into it, or even a shadowy figure, first they're primed. They already think the place is haunted, so they're going to naturally say, like, this picture is of a ghost. The second issue is that there's a lack of knowledge. There's a severe lack of knowledge and critical thinking, because you have people that are not photographers giving expert analysis of photographs. You have people that never did video editing giving expert analysis on videos. Same with audio. Expert opinion on audios, and none of them have ever been in front of a mixer before. They have no idea what it is. So you have a lot of these self-proclaimed experts in fields that they have no knowledge in. So I think that's your two biggest issues: misperception and a lack of knowledge, which you can actually extend into some ignorance. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just ignorance, because they just don't have the knowledge necessary to understand what they're looking at. There's a lack of scientific controls. If we want to perform an experiment, we have to have some kind of controls on that to control for the variables, the known variables. So if I don't know, if I let's see. I'm trying to think of an experiment. If I shine a light down a hallway and I can predict, like, okay, if I shine this flashlight down there, it's going to look this way. These walls will be this certain color. But if I put filters in front of it, it'll change the color. So I have to have certain controls. I have to make sure that I'm putting the right filters in front of it. I have to make sure there's no other light sources in that hallway that would affect it. Because if I'm holding a yellow light, or if, let's say, I'm holding a red light and somebody forgot to turn on the ceiling light or turn off the ceiling light, which is yellow, that's going to create a different color on the walls. So you have to make sure you control for that other light. So basically, I mean, that might have been a confusing description, but basically you have to control everything that you know is going on during your experiment. And when we have these haunted houses being investigated, there are no controls. People are taking little gadgets, they're putting them on a table and walking away, and they have no idea what's going on in that room. Like, they could walk away for hours and have a video camera going, or just an audio recorder, or even something like what's called an EMF meter. They'll leave it in the room by itself, and there's no control. Nobody knows what's going on. There's no monitoring. Nobody knows anything. You know, if somebody walked in that room by mistake and walked out, they don't know if an animal came in from outside, maybe snuck in through a hole in the wall. No controls whatsoever. So those are the three biggest. The misperception, lack of knowledge, and no controls when they're doing their experiments. So that's just the beginning. And then we get into analysis. Again, we touched on it already. If you're not an expert in something, you should not be giving expert analysis on like photographs or video. You just shouldn't be doing it. But they do. For some reason, when you become a ghost hunter, you automatically become an expert in everything. I don't know what magic is going on there, but that's what I see. You automatically know everything about forensics, photography, biology, chemistry, physics, space-time continuums. You know it all because you suddenly called yourself a ghost hunter. So there you go. That's the big three.
You don't give a huge window in the explanations for something like the hallucinations. I thought once that the first story is about some house could be coming from someone who is really seeing hallucinations. Or there is an article in Skeptical Inquirer, I think it's about the parasites could induce hallucinations when you smell them, and they grow in these places, or sometimes of mushroom or whatever. You don't give so much value in the explanation to these.
Well, they are important too, but what the examples I gave are common ones that I come across. I don't normally come across people that are actually hallucinating. Once in a while, it does happen, so I wouldn't discount that, and that's still in the running. That's still something you have to consider. But the most common things for me are the items that I listed, because you can also go into how your perception is altered. And one way is through hallucinations, because your perception is altered in that state of mind. But if someone watched a horror movie, if someone watched a really scary horror movie, I can guarantee the rest of the night, they are going to be jumpy. Any little creak that happens, any little flutter of light that happens down the hallway, they are going to jump at it and think like, what's that? What's down the hallway? Oh, we're going to get possessed. Like, I can see all that happening. Yet you take that same person and you sit them in front of a Disney family movie that's, all nice and everyone's happy and everything works out at the end, and then send them to bed. They're not going to jump at every noise. They're not going to jump at every shadow. So it's that how you're influenced at night. Drugs, alcohol. If people are on certain drugs, you do have to look at the medication that they're on and see what the side effects are, because that could induce hallucinations, as you said, whether visual or auditory. You have to be careful of that. Other illnesses. I did an article. And I forget what she was suffering from. Oh, it was a friend of mine that I worked with. His mother was experiencing ghosts. Like, she was seeing people from her family, like her husband who had died like 20 years prior. She was seeing little children run around. She was seeing people that she didn't know break into her house. They weren't really, but she was seeing them. And after talking with my buddy and my coworker, I told him, you know what, this kind of sounds like a medical issue, and you need to go to the doctor. So the next day, that's what happened, and found out that she was suffering from a urinary tract infection, and that's one of the most common causes for people having hallucinations. So older women, especially, have hallucinations when they have a UTI. So medical conditions are definitely something that you have to consider, but they are not as common in most of the investigations that I have done so far. I mean, there's a lot of common things that I look for first, and I go down a list. You know, every time I get somebody approaches me and says, "Hey, you know, I'm having this experience in my house," I listen to their story, I listen to the details, I ask a few questions, I clarify a few things, and I start making a list of all the possibilities that I can come up with that might cause that. And I'll go down the list. And medical is always on there. Medications is always on there. Have you talked to your doctor? Have you talked to a psychiatrist or a psychologist? And we just have to go down the line. So there's plenty of things to consider, but it just depends on the situation.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, I think related to this question, I just have a map. I'll share it with you. It's about beliefs in the UFO. What I see from the first side, for when I look at the map, is that it's mainly related to the English-speaking world, United States, England and Wales mainly, and then Ireland, and then you see there are spots in New Zealand and Australia, and there is a dot as well in Netherlands and Belgium. Of course, there are in other areas in the world, but for example, if you look at India and China, they have massive populations, and there are only small dots there. So I don't know if anyone decided that there is a correlation between being from that culture or from the English speaking world and having this. And the same way, for example, believing in a specific substance effect, which is some kind of herbal substances or anything, and being the Arab world or those who are living in the east of the Arab world or in Egypt, for example. So, in general, about the types of supernatural or paranormal phenomena or beliefs of the paranormal phenomena that you studied, and see some demographies or some education level, what type of people do that? For example, I can say about the Arab world that those who believe in pseudoscience usually have some education. But those who believe in superstition, something like putting a child inside a dead animal to cure the child from the disease, that these people are totally not educated. So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, that's one of them. Or
So what does that do? What
so,
you put a child inside of a dead
yeah, so when
animal? That's
they
what
so
you
when
said?
they slay the cow or the sheep, and they empty the sheep from whatever inside
The
the
guts. Yeah.
yeah, and then they just put the child for a few seconds inside. It's not common, but you can see some doctors talking about it when they see a patient in a very bad condition. They get the child later to the doctor. I say, "What did you do?" And they say, "Oh, we didn't do anything. We just gave him that. We did that. We did that. We did that." And it's all superstition. But you
Okay.
can classify them by the education level or by the group where they live or the language. Or we talked about the full moon. So what's your
Right.
view about the demographies, education, or any other type of segmentation?
I mean, I looked it up because I mean, in personal experience, eh, there's different education levels, from just a high school degree up to college or trade school. So, and then even academics, I've seen have these wondrous beliefs in religious miracles and or ghosts. So I don't see much there. I do see it with religion, though. I see because I'm used to being around Catholics. So the the majority of people that I deal with are some kind of Christian, uh, and there's a lot of belief that comes from that. And I see a lot of them wear the cross, and but they also invoke prayers before and after they do a ghost hunt. So I see that associated with beliefs. I also see, like I pulled up a graph here that was doing, it was a survey that was done in 2022, and it shows that at the top of the list, when it polled Americans, uh, we had 37% were Catholics, and that was the top tier. Like that was the top demographic that believed in supernatural events or superstitions. So Catholics were top, 30 to 44-year-olds were next. A family income of $100,000 or more. Those people were, and that's that. You know what? That doesn't surprise me because psychics, psychic people, and mediums. That's like a multi-million-dollar industry. You know, when you're selling crap, like cold reading and hot reading techniques, and people are coming back to you, they make a lot of money. I mean, I've seen psychics charge like $30 to $40 for just 15 minutes to talk to them. And most of that time, they ask you questions, you give them the answer, and they repeat it back. So I don't get the value in that money, but I mean, that's what people do, and they keep coming back. So I can understand that. And homeopathic medicine and other things like Reiki and all this metaphysical, like kind of healing, I can see the why over 100 grand a year is in that demographic of believing in superstitions. We also have people who live in the Northeast of the country, which I think, according to that map you had, that was that was pretty spot on. Um, I think
Yeah.
later on in that map, yeah, it pops up and says, "Oh yeah, the Northeast of uh of the country has the most." So what else do we have? We have people who are spiritual, which doesn't surprise me, and then people with a college degree are more superstitious than those without a college
Really?
degree. And I was like, what? And that came in as a whopping 30% of those polled. And then Republicans are on there as being more, I guess, more. Yeah, they're more superstitious than Democrats. So Republican, but only 1%. So no big deal. And then let's see, women were more likely to be superstitious than men. So women were at 30% and men was at 23%. So there's varying degrees, and I think it's really all over the place. It really doesn't matter what level of education you have. I think it's your upbringing, who influences you as you grow up, and whether or not you want to accept it. Because like I said in the beginning, I grew up Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I was raised with these spiritual and supernatural beliefs. You know, like the main belief is that the God sent his only son down who died on a cross and then rose. I mean, 3 days later, like to me, that's like a supernatural being becoming a zombie. That's how I see it, you know, and I see it that way now. But when I was a child, I saw it as like this supernatural great thing that really happened until I started really thinking about it and thinking through. So I think it's definitely like how you grew up and who influenced you, and then later in life, if you're willing to accept those stories, and you if you want to learn critical thinking or not, if you want to start looking at things in more detail. So I think it's really across the board. Although that that thing with the college degree thing really surprised me.
Yeah, me
But
too. Yeah.
yeah,
Another thing about haunted houses, I remember there were three stories, three haunted houses in the neighborhood where I lived in Baghdad, and it's the one. Two of them were sold, and they became fancy houses, castles, and something that makes me believe that there could be some real estate conspiracy behind the ghost stories. I don't know if you agree with that or not, or if it is possible or common or not. The third house, I can't remember if it was sold and was refurbished or rebuilt and remade in a beautiful way or not, but with time, all the stories about the three houses have gone. So, how old could a story about a haunted house go? And also, could it be related to someone who wants to sell the house in a lower price so that they give such stories? And I remember hearing the stories about one of these houses, and it was the house had a statue of an eagle on the top of house, and the children were talking about it, and someone said, I went there to take the ball, and I hear someone shouting on me, and then I ran away. And I remember the castle, or the Carpathian castle of the Jules Verne's, that there could be someone staying there and shouting and doing some effects sometimes. And if the house is going to worth something like
Right.
$100,000, maybe that was the price by that time. So I think these are two questions or two topics.
These are good questions. So there's really no time limit on how old a house could be or has to be in order to have a ghost story associated with it, because it's not always the house. Sometimes it's just the land. I've had several stories come my way where the house that's on the land now is like the second or third house that was built there. So it was like previous houses where something
And the
happened,
story
or maybe,
continues
yes,
with
the
all the
story
houses.
continues. So, but when you have an older house, that provides more history. That provides a longer time period in which to set your spooky events or horrible events that would lead up to a haunting. Um, but I mean, I've had people tell me like brand new houses that are only like 5 years old have something going on, and there's no history associated with it. There's nothing about the land. It's newly developed land, and all of a sudden it's haunted. So then it transfers over to, or the blame transfers over to maybe an object. Perhaps they brought something home. They went to a haunted house somewhere else, and when they came home, they brought a spirit home with them. They brought an extra guest. Or maybe they bought an object at an antique store that's supposed to be cursed or possessed or something like that, and now that's the cause of it. So there really is no time limit, because there's other factors involved that people will bring into the story. That narrative can go anywhere at once, really. But when we're talking about price manipulation, I've seen it go both ways. To be honest, I've seen people lose money because their house was allegedly haunted. I mean, we have a case here in New York. It's the famous case. It's called the Ghostbusters case, because it went to court because somebody tried to buy the house and found out, like, before they purchased it completely, they were under contract to buy the house, but then they found out that there was a magazine article that came out from the former owner that told ghost stories that allegedly happened in the house, and it wasn't related. It wasn't told to the new owner or the purchaser that, hey, this place is known to be haunted. They had tours going through, so they had guided tours that would come up to the house and tell stories about it, and the buyer didn't know anything about it, and they went to court, and the buyer was able to get out of the contract because of this. So I think they eventually sold the house at a lower price because they couldn't sell it. People were afraid of it. But times have changed, and now haunted houses are, popular. They are the thing to have. So we have another one. I don't know if you've known the movie The Conjuring. Have you heard of that?
No, no.
Okay, that's good. It sucks. You don't need to see it. But it's based on a true story, and I say that loosely, very loosely. But there's a house, and it's in Rhode Island, and it's a farmhouse, and it's known for this story to be haunted. And one of the previous owners, I knew her. Very nice lady, very nice. The movie came out, and people started going to her house, like on her property, trespassing, not asking permission, just going on, banging on the door, trying to look inside the windows. It made life really hard for her. So she sold the house, and she sold it to a couple that turned it into a tourist attraction. So that couple only paid about $400,000 for it. But because it became so popular, they sold the house again. They resold the house a year later for $1.5 million. So over $1 million profit because of the reputation of that house being haunted. So that's manipulation. That's definitely manipulation, but in a way we wouldn't expect.
Positive way.
Yeah, in a positive way for them, at least.
Yeah, for them.
So it can really go either way now. And nowadays it's not so bad because you have people that are so invested in this or interested in this, and they want a haunted house. I've come across two people already in the last year that have wanted me to come out to investigate their house in order to get evidence so they can show it off to TV shows and get on TV, because they want to either open it up to rent to ghost hunters every weekend, or they want to sell it for a higher price. So they're actively seeking out someone, and this someone is the wrong person for that. Like, you don't want that, because I'm not going to find your ghosts. I'm going to find out what's going on. But they're actively looking for people to come in and promote this haunted activity in order to get more money out of it. So it really can go either way. And I can understand small towns too, if you don't want to be bothered, because there is a downside to it. Once people know that your house has a reputation for being haunted, everybody wants to go, and nobody's respectful. They don't care that you're the owner. They don't care about your peace and quiet. They don't care about your privacy. They want to come onto your land because most of these tourists or onlookers, they think they have a right to just walk onto your property. And that's why my friend that owned the Conjuring house first, like, she sold it because she couldn't take it anymore. People were just hounding her all hours of the night, just breaking into her barn, trying to get into the house. I mean, it was terrible.
Unfortunately, when I was a child, and one of these houses that I mentioned, we used to go there, and there was someone who was living there, and some of the children were throwing stones, and they want to trigger the ghost to get out.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, I think the last question is, or the last topic is, we already talked about cultures and in two different occasions in this conversation, but the other one is, have you faced any culture that don't have any beliefs of ghosts? We are from two different worlds, and I mentioned that the Arabs pre-Islam, they had similar beliefs, although they didn't have Hollywood. They weren't in touch with the West, and apparently the West itself has some organic culture of ghosts. So could there be any culture that doesn't have this?
I'm sure there is. I don't know of any offhand, and I did a quick search. I couldn't find any culture that popped up. But there may be. But I kind of think supernatural or paranormal beliefs, that's a wide net. Like, when you say paranormal, that covers a lot of things. That doesn't describe one particular thing
Yeah.
in detail. It's a wide net. So when you throw that when we throw that word out there, it can mean anything from seeing a shadow, float around and scream "get out" of your house, to uh, some cultures that take their deceased loved ones back out of their graves and prop them up and celebrate their lives. They're talking about the ancestors or praying to their ancestors. That's, to me, that's a supernatural belief.
Yeah, but if we
So
talk about ghosts only,
ghosts only. So I guess it would go in the same category. Like, I don't know of any culture that doesn't have some form of ghost.
mm,
And again, like, does that mean the ghost of your parents, ghost of your children coming back, or just a ghost in general?
is an
Because
evil
again,
creature or someone who's,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to derail your question. It's just, like, even when you say ghost, it's such an open-ended term that, like, what does that mean? I don't know. It's just because when I come across ghost hunters and they're like, well, you know what? I saw a ghost and it did this. And my first question is, what do you mean by ghost? Like, what are you talking about? Did you see a person? Because for us, like, you could say I had a ghost experience, and that could mean I saw a figure that looked solid, just like you and me. I saw somebody, they walked into a room, I went down to the room, nobody was there. That's a ghost. But you could also have someone see, like, a flutter of light, like, shine around or zip around. That's a ghost. You could also have someone that is sitting there like working one day in their office, in their home office, and they hear what they think is their name being called from or from outside. They think their wife or their husband is calling their name, and they go out. Nobody called them. That's a ghost. Like, that can be described as a ghost. So we have no idea what it really means. But so to get back to your actual question, I don't know personally of any cultures that do not have some kind of supernatural belief or ghost belief. So that's the best I can do for you.
Thank you so much, Kenny. This was
You're
very
welcome.
interesting, and I will share with you later the magazine. Thanks again.
Anytime, buddy. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and maybe we can do this again.
Yeah. That's great.
Cool.
Thanks. Bye.